In this episode of Stop, Look, and Listen, we catch up with Keshia Ginn, president of Crisis. We discuss pairing Mecklenburg County Police with fully licensed clinical social workers, mental health in rural communities, and more. Tell me first about, being the Crisis Mecklenburg County Mobile Crisis Service. Tell me about that.
Sure. So I am currently the president of the Mecklenburg Mobile Crisis Team. The official company name is Crisis. And so I've been with the company for 6 years and have, I started out on the front lines there. So it's a 24-hour, 24/7, 365 crisis intervention service for Mecklenburg County. So I manage a team of licensed clinicians, social workers, and counselors who go out to wherever they're needed in the Mecklenburg community, assisting individuals in crisis. We service kids as young as 5, through adults, older adults, 85 plus. And so the goal is really to keep people in their communities and help avoid unnecessary hospitalizations and or incarceration. So we want to keep people out of the emergency rooms and out of jail in cases where it's more of a behavioral health issue. So my team of clinicians will go out, they do a crisis assessment, and the goal is to help the person come up with a plan. We provide resources, we do follow up with them until the situation is stabilized and they've connected to a community provider. So it's an amazing service. There's no charge for people in the community. And it's an opportunity for people to remain in the comfort, of their own space and receive, mental health, substance use. Sometimes it's situational. It might be a domestic situation going on. So it could be mental health, substance use, or situational. We don't define what the crisis is. So if it's causing distress to the caller, we treat it as a crisis. We go out, we assist the individual. And again, the goal is to help them develop a plan, get connected to resources, and be able to do those things within their own communities.
You said you were with the company for 6 years. How did this come about? Is this something that is funded by Mecklenburg County, or do you guys get federal funds in any way?
So it's a combination. I'd worked in a lot of different sectors before coming on to Mobile Crisis. Our parent company is the affiliated Sante Group, and it's based out of Silver Spring, Maryland. So we have lots of different services across the Maryland, DC area. And we are the only entity here in North Carolina. So it's a private company. We typically we have contracts established. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with Cardinal Innovations. They are the managed care organization for North Carolina for certain regions, and we fall in that region. And so they provide us pretty significant funding. And then we have a contract with the school system where we have clinicians who are dedicated solely to Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools, responding to crisis for school-age kids. And then we have a police program where we are, that contract is funded by the city of Charlotte. And so we have clinicians paired with crisis intervention trained officers. So it's funded through a few different mechanisms, but typically we've been in the county since 2006. Here serving as the only 24/7 mobile crisis team. And so we've developed amazing partnerships over that time. Which has led to the initiation of a lot of these contracts that we currently have in place.
So I want to focus a little bit more on the police product that you guys are providing. Now, how does this work? Do you have people that actually go out on calls with police? And how do you determine the calls that people go out on for this type of commitment, as opposed to just having police show up and pull the gun out and, it might be some mental health situation going on? How do they determine that?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is, we've heard across the country in terms of, police interactions with people suffering from mental health disorders, and it's no different here in Mecklenburg County. And so that's been an ongoing issue. It's been an ongoing discussion. And so this program was really in talks for a few years. And then we, started to see more cases of negative outcomes, for people, particularly people of color, who are experiencing a mental health or substance use issue, and they make calls to 911. So, the city fortunately saw this as a real issue. They put out a proposal. Crisis was the only agency who put in a bid for it. And because we'd already had a pretty, strong relationship with Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police, it made sense to do this partnership. So we commit 6 clinicians, licensed clinicians, who are paired with crisis intervention trained officers. So these officers have gone through the 40-hour-a-week crisis intervention training, and they do periodic refreshers. So this unit does not respond to anything else other than calls that come through the 911 system where the individual is experiencing a behavioral health or substance use issue. So the calls are funneled through 911. Officers who are not a part of this team typically respond to the scene to ensure that the scene is safe. Because my clinicians are not armed, and that's intentional. And so the officers go, they ensure that the scene is safe, and then they radio this team to come out. And so this officer and clinician are riding in tandem in the car. They work 10-hour shifts, and they are responding to individuals to de-escalate situations, trained specifically more so for the clinician, to engage that individual or family, to get them what they need, hopefully, again, to keep them in the community, connect them with resources. But if it's a situation where the person needs to get to behavioral health for a more extensive psychiatric evaluation, then the clinician and the officer can coordinate getting that person there. If they need to get them to detox, then that team can coordinate that. So this team does not do normal traffic stops. They don't, patrol. They respond solely to behavioral health calls in the community. And again, because they're not armed, the clinicians aren't armed, we want to make sure it's safe for them to enter the scene before they try to engage and do an assessment. But it's been an amazing program. We initiated it April of last year. We're seeing amazing outcomes. The number of encounters with police, with individuals with behavioral health issues, those stories, thankfully, within the last year and a half, we've seen those go, not be non-existent. And I think it has a lot to do with this partnership. I do want to make one other important point when it comes to police. I think we have to do a better job. And when I say we, mental health professionals, agencies as a whole, I think we have to do a better job of educating communities about the resources that are available and how to access those resources for people in the community who need mental health and who need substance use services. People are prone to calling 911, and unless you have a specialized unit like we have here, police officers aren't trained. That's not their line of work, to go out and be compassionate and empathetic. Now, there's a humane, component to that, yeah, if you're responding, even if you're not trained, the expectation would be that you would, deal with this person in a humane manner. But that aside, they aren't trained, to deal with mental health. Typically, though, they're the first point of contact when somebody's experiencing a mental health crisis. So I think we need to do a better job of educating communities about services like mobile crisis, where you can call in. It's a 24/7 service, and we have a community-based team that doesn't involve officers. We have the specialized unit, but we also have a community-based team, and those clinicians can respond out without an officer if there's not a safety concern. And so I think getting people to understand how to access those types of resources will significantly decrease the amount of calls going to 911 to begin with when it's a mental health issue.
When you hear calls to defund the police, do you think that is more along the lines of creating programs such as this one across this country, as opposed to what I think people are really thinking, that we're trying to get rid of police forces?
Absolutely. I mean, we can't live in a world without police safety, without law enforcement. It's not realistic. We see crime, particularly here in Charlotte, is escalating. We need police, and so I think, we're oblivious if we think we can operate in a world without police. So when I hear defunding the police, yes, that's exactly what I think the intent should be, is to allocate more funding for programs for the employment of trained professionals who are able, to effectively work with people who are struggling. Police can't do that. And I think that's where we're mistaken is we're calling 911 and we're assuming that they're going to come out, be compassionate, and help, people get the services they need. So yeah, defunding in my mind is allocation of programs such as the mobile crisis team, the community policing team, where trained professionals are the ones who are actually assisting.
Are other cities that you are aware of trying to emulate what you guys have been able to do in Charlotte? Because I imagine that there's not a lot of programs like this in major cities across this country.
There's not. Before we started the program up here, Houston has a robust community response team. And so myself and a few of the officers from the Charlotte Mecklenburg Police Department flew to Houston, talked with their staff. I mean, it's amazing. They have officers, law enforcement so embedded in their human services that it's so impressionable. I was like, oh my, I can move to Houston. I mean, it's amazing. They have law enforcement attached to their homeless population. It's amazing. And I think they are a great model for how other cities should work to establish these types of programs. But yeah, they're not a lot. They're not enough. I think every city needs a community crisis response team with trained professionals. But yeah, aside from, we have part of our affiliated Sante group, our parent company, we also have a pretty robust crisis response team in Baltimore. And so again, talk with them a lot before we did our startup here in Charlotte. So a few cities, not nearly enough. Not nearly enough.
Do you foresee more of this being implemented across the country?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm an outcomes person. I know that numbers drive funding. And so it's been really important for us this first year plus to be able to demonstrate good outcomes, effective outcomes. But I've heard of cities that are also pairing mental health professionals with EMS. And so they're sending them out with medic. And so, yeah, I think there's certainly opportunity, again, in every city, medic, your law enforcement, any of those first responders who are likely encountering hundreds of people on a weekly basis, but don't have that mental health professional, in riding in tandem with them, they need to consider this type of program. So yeah, I think it's certainly going to, it's gonna be on the rise in cities as we move forward.
Buried this part of this interview, but we grew up in the same place.
Yeah.
And actually, I graduated from the same university.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about your background and how you arrived at this moment in time.
Absolutely. So yeah, from a really small town, I used to read tons. So I'm a big literature person. But it was, growing up in our small town, you didn't see a whole lot of success. And so reading exposed me to that. And so I did undergraduate studies at Winthrop. Absolutely loved Winthrop, loved my experience there. And it really kind of helped me, really kind of come into my own. I really got to know myself. I got to embrace the things about me that felt a little awkward or weird, in the little, town we grew up in. But suddenly I'm on this campus where people get to be themselves, and it's, the differences are embraced. And so it was a beautiful thing. So my undergraduate is in psychology. I wanted to get, my feet in early, thought I wanted to be an English major. And then I was like, no, I want to know why people do what they do. And so that led me really kind of to the psychology. I wanted to get my feet in early. And so I worked at a domestic violence shelter third shift my senior year of undergraduate studies and absolutely loved it. I didn't love the shift, but I absolutely loved it. Working with women coming in with their children out of DV situations, it was amazing. And so found a really great mentor, amazing mentor, who was a licensed clinical social worker. And so she really just became, you know, a person I looked up to, admired, and she had her own private practice. And I was like, wow, she's doing amazing things. She's an African-American woman, so she looks like me, and she's successful. And that to me was very exciting. Like that was very appealing to me. So she took me under her wings and really exposed me more to the variety of social work. And so, you know, at that point I have my BA in psychology. What am I going to do with this? And so she was like, you know, look into social work. You know, it's, you know, so open, you can do so many things with it. And so that's what I did. Looked into social work, but I needed to be working full time. So I did the part-time MSW, Master of Social Work program at USC Columbia. So I was living in Rock Hill and commuting every weekend back and forth to Columbia for this part-time program because I had to work full-time, and you know, it wasn't an option, but I wanted my master's. And so then went to, while working on the master's, went to work for a sex offender program for adolescents. Found out really quickly I did not like that, didn't want to do that. And so it was about 9 months and I was like, I'm out of here. And then I went to work for the Department of Mental Health in South Carolina. I started out in a residential program. And so these were adults who were right out of psychiatric hospitals. And so they lived in this home. It was 4 of them. So we did groups, you know, we did some individual therapy, made sure they had medications. Did that for, I don't even remember how long, and then transferred. It was still within the Department of Mental Health, but I went to work for their day program. And this was more like a clubhouse model. And so individuals would come there during the day. We did a lot of psychosocial activities. And so stayed at the Department of Mental Health until I got my MSW, and then came to Charlotte and got my first supervisory job as the clinical director for 4 residential group homes. And level 3 placements were a big deal at that point a few years ago. So I managed the 3 group homes, tremendous learning experience. And because I had the same mentor, you know, she really stressed licensure. And so I was like, man, I've done 4 years of college, 3 years of this part-time program. Now I got to do 2 more years of licensure. Like, really? But it was what was necessary. You know, I just knew it was going to make me more marketable. I was going to find my niche with that. So I did the clinical director for the group homes, worked on my licensure for 2 years, and then moved on, went to work for Florence Crittenton, which is a residential program for teens and young women who are pregnant and trying to find their way. So I was the clinical director there for 4 years. Then transferred and went to a crisis stabilization unit as their clinical site director. And there I managed a 16-bed crisis stabilization center for people who needed mental health or substance use stabilization. And mental health has been my path. I found myself in many jobs with mental health and have absolutely loved it. Left the crisis stabilization, went to work for the hospital for a year because I was like, I need to get away from management. Didn't like the hospital setting. And then came to mobile crisis, again, where I've been for 6 years. Started out there more in a dual role. I was in the field, actually going out, seeing people, doing assessments, but also providing some supervision. And then within a year, got promoted to director. And then 4 years later, promoted to president. And so that's kind of where I am today. It's been a journey. So now I provide clinical supervision to individuals working on becoming fully licensed as licensed clinical social workers. So I feel like I found my niche. I found my calling. I love mental health. I love advocacy. Kind of got away from the direct service, and I like more of the big picture. So I like negotiating contracts. I like the advocacy. I like the community engagement piece of it. And so that's kind of where I am.
You mentioned we grew up in Allendale County, Fairfax, South Carolina, and this is a massive population of people of color. And I think last time I checked, the population was 92% Black in Allendale County. What can you tell me about the stigma of mental health in the Black community, in particular rural communities like Allendale?
Yeah, I want to say I think we're making strides. We're making strides. But there's so much more work to be done. And that's why I welcome opportunities such as this one to provide education, because I think it's so important for African American professionals, people of color who are mental health professionals, and they're only 4% of psychologists, 4% of the social workers, and only 2% of psychiatrists are people of color. And so I think when we look at those very small percentages, there's so much more to be done in terms of more educated, experienced mental health professionals educating, again, engaging in forums like this, because people in little towns, small towns like Fairfax, there's such a stigma, there's such a stigma. We call mental health everything but, if somebody has anxiety issues in Fairfax, they're going to say they got bad nerves. If somebody has a mood disorder, they're going to just say they're moody. One minute they're this way, the next minute they're this. And so, we call it everything but. We want to keep everything within our household. That's how we grew up, is that there's something wrong with telling somebody who's not a part of this house what's going on with a member of this house. We also rely very, very heavily, and I'm a believer, I'm a person of faith, but we extend our faith when it comes to thinking that God and Jesus, it's a spirit, and if we just get that spirit prayed out of you, you'll be fine. And, so I really feel like it takes people like me who grew up in very small towns to be able to say, mental illness is real.
Right.
These are the numbers. People are dying every single day because they're suffering in silence, and we don't have to do that. Or, if we have a mental health issue, which we're not going to call it a mental health issue, we're going to self-medicate by using drugs. That's what happens in small rural communities like Fairfax. And so there's so much stigma attached to it. So I think a huge part of it, again, is education. And I think education, again, from people of color. Research has shown that for people of color who are seeking treatment and who actually engage in treatment, the percentage is so much higher for those who remain engaged if they are connected to a therapist who looks like them. It's a big deal because we have cultural sensitivity to think about. We don't want to, a Black male is not inclined. First of all, it's a struggle to get, Black males to therapy, but then you send him to a 25-year-old blonde-haired, blue-eyed female, it's not going to cut it. It's not going to cut it. And so there's a lot of stigma. And so, it's become one of my life goals now, to educate our people. I'm doing in 2 weeks a session for African-American teenagers on suicide prevention, because the rates for African-American, particularly boys, is rising by the minute. It's totally alarming. And so there's work to be done. So yeah, there's, in the small rural communities, it's a lot of, again, we don't want people to think that there's something wrong. We don't want to involve strangers. We as professionals, people of color who are professionals, need to let our communities know it's okay. It's okay. And there are people who look like you who are trained and experienced enough to provide that help to you.
You touched on Black males and real quick, give you a little bit of my journey,
Okay.
not to take away too much from what you're saying.
Sure, absolutely.
I just want to put this out there for the universe to take it in. But, you know, I've had a ton of professional success over the years, and, you know, for some reason, something went right for me, and couldn't find happiness. And you know, eventually a good friend of mine, also from Allendale County, my man Keith Young, he convinced me to seek therapy. And I actually went through and I interviewed several different therapists. And surprisingly, I ended up landing on a blonde haired, blue eyed woman. uh, but there was something about her in our phone and phone conversations that let me know that she was the right person. And it took several weeks
Uh-huh.
before the wall got broken down a little bit and stuff. But and that was something that I remember her talking about early on about that struggle with relatability, not being male, not being black. But I think that because of her knowledge and understanding that she knew that that there was differences there culturally and stuff, I think that made things easier for me to communicate with her. But it's something that me and her have talked about several times. I still go, but we talked about it several times about what can we do to get more black men to embrace their mental health the way that we embrace physical health. Because
Yes.
you know, I didn't have anybody really that I communicated any of this stuff with. Even my closest friends didn't know that I was battling these demons inside. And then once I did start talking about it, they were surprised. And I think that maybe I was part of the problem with trying to run from whatever the issues may have been and trying to put on this facade of being macho as opposed to accepting what was going on and trying to find a way to get help. So my question to you is, how do we get more black men to embrace that? And because I think that a lot of what we experience in America as black and as males, it's hard for us to be normal upstairs. And I shouldn't even say normal, but there's stuff going on up here because
Absolutely.
we watch basically genocide of black men on a daily basis on television. And luckily there are programs like the ones that you are a part of that are trying to prevent that from happening in places like Charlotte. But you have that going on. You have, the difficulties that you approach when you get to work and all of this stuff, the way that we grew up, all of this stuff can influence negativity in our mental state. So what is it that people like myself and others can do to try to convince more of our brethren to try to do the same thing that I decided to do?
Yeah, well, first of all, kudos to you. It's major. I am applauding, every person who decides to get therapy, but especially black men who decide to get therapy. So I applaud you. And then I applaud your therapist because you said something that's extremely important and it makes a huge difference in whether or not a male or a female can go to a blonde-haired, blue-eyed therapist and connect. It's that acknowledgement of there's a difference. You know what I mean? And I think a lot of times we operate, non-people of color operate with this implicit bias that they understand us, that they know us, because they put us in a box. And it's like, no, we come with our own unique set of, our own unique backgrounds and upbringings and beliefs and values. So I think a huge part of that is acknowledgement. And I think more therapists, non-people of color, need to do that. Because I think it makes a difference in breaking down that wall and helping the person feel like you acknowledge that. And so there's an openness and a willingness to hear and get to know me. So I think that's extremely important. I think forums like this, Mario, are huge. I was super excited, when you reached out, because to have one of the things that's become extremely important to me, and I really try not to, and sometimes I do it to a fault. I really try not to turn down any opportunity, to provide education and to really help people see and understand how important good mental health is. And so I believe that whatever forum you have, that you can use that platform, to spread good, to spread positive, to educate, to provide information to people. And so I think this is an opportunity, towards that cause. You're exactly right. I mean, I look at, the things that we face as people of color, just collectively in America. And then I put Black men in a box all by themselves, because you guys have an entirely different set of issues in addition to the ones that we all face.
Right.
And so, there's a lot of stigma still attached to, Black men and mental health. The barbershop is the place where you go and you dump, you unload and you dump. That's not therapy. Yeah, you unload. These aren't professionals in most cases. These are brothers who are, giving you their yes or no, yay or nay about whatever your situation is. So there's still a lot of stigma attached to it. So I think opportunities where, like this, to see, a brother be able to speak out and say, yeah, I've got my own battles, I'm fighting my own battles. And this is the course that worked for me. I think every time we see that, I think it makes it on some level easier for men to look at it. And even if they're not ready today, to have those examples. So I think that's a big part of it. I also think that we have to start, not that there's not hope for our men, because I do. I think there are a lot of men who need that push from other brothers, if with females, because I've done it myself, tried to encourage brothers to go to therapy, and they weren't hearing me, because I'm a female. So I think there's a significant factor in men helping other men. I think that is major. Black men helping other Black men. And then I think we really need to start with our boys. We got to start with our young Black boys. We have to change this mindset of you don't show emotions, all the things that you guys are taught growing up, the things I heard my brothers be told, wipe those tears, suck it up. You're a boy, you're tough. You're supposed to be, we got to stop that. We got to stop that with boys. We got to let boys know it's okay. You do have feelings. You're human, and what you do with those feelings, that's important. But you have feelings, and it's okay for you to have that vulnerability to you. So I think we've got to do more, starting with young Black boys, in terms of sitting down, talking to them. Yes, they need extracurriculars. Yes, they need great, Black male role models, not just Black, but I think Black role models are essential. But aside from extracurricular and sports, and because what I'm finding is a lot of these Black boys who are committing suicide belong to athletic organizations. And every time I hear about it, it's totally disheartening, because I'm like, nobody on this football team saw that this guy was struggling. The coaches, the assistant, nobody saw that this kid was struggling. And so we've got to do a better job instead of, again, I'm all for sports. My nephews play sports. I love it. I think it's an amazing outlet for boys. I think it's something, to have them aspire to something greater. But I think it's also important that they understand, you can play football and still deal with depression. You can play football and still have anxiety issues. And it's okay, to do both. It's okay to have your mental health, your anxiety, your depression treated, and you're still playing football. As a matter of fact, you're probably going to be a better player if you get that mental health addressed. And so, again, with access to weapons, guns, gun reform we just need it desperately. But with kids having so much more access to guns, the seeing of violence, everywhere around us, tragedies like George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery, our Black boys seeing other, our Black boys seeing Black men, who look like them being gunned down or shot down for no reason at all. It affects their psyche. you know, and so we've got to talk to our children. We do. We've got to talk to them about what's happening in the world. In addition to the racial injustices, we've got, you know, COVID and kids are out of school and those social outlets have been interrupted. And so kids are affected, you know, and we got to not put the video games in front of them and that's their entertainment. We've got to talk to our kids about what's happening in our community and not be afraid that if you see something beyond what you as a parent are able to manage, that you reach out to the professionals and get your child help. So I think we got to start early. We got to start early.
Before we let you go, tell everybody how they can find out more information about Crisis.
Absolutely. So I am on Facebook, Keshia LCSW Ginn. I post a lot of information there. Crisis also has a Facebook page that I manage, so you can go to Crisis LLC on Facebook. I'm on LinkedIn as well, not on Instagram at the moment. I try to keep it where I can manage it. Email is Keshia Ginn, KESHIAGINN @gmail.com. So if anyone wants to reach out, our main number for Crisis, I always think it's important to provide it, is 704-566-3410, option number 1. It's a 24/7, 365. There's always a live person. Again, no charge for the service. And you know, we have phone counselors available and ready to take your call. So reach out. We are all in this together. And there's no shame at all in mental health. So don't suffer in silence. Reach out if needed.
Well, Keshia, we appreciate the time. The whole Allendale County is super proud of you. And
thank you, back at you.
You keep fighting the good fight. I think
I will. Thank you so much for this opportunity, Mario. I really appreciate it. Keep doing amazing work.
Well, I'll do my best. And you know, I appreciate you spending some time with us today.
Absolutely, no problem. Have a good evening.
Hey everybody, my name is Cammie and thank you so much for watching our YouTube channel. Be sure to subscribe for more great content and don't forget to check us out on social media at GOB Radio Network.